Good morning. I'll call the Fiscal Committee meeting to order for the August 16th, 2024 meeting. And the first item is the acceptance of minutes of June 20th
So moved. Second.
and July 10th, both of those.
Second.
Take that as both of them. Is there any,
Who was that? Moved and seconded.
it was Senator Bradley and Senator Gray. Any omissions or corrections? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting the minutes for those two dates, June 20th and July 10th, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. And want to welcome Senator Susi, replacing Senator Rosenwald, to the session. Okay, there is no old business. And under first tab 3 is where the consent calendar goes from tabs 3 through 9. In the House pre-fiscal meetings, we have listed several bills that we want removed to question on the consent calendar. I will read them now. Under tab 3, 251, 252, and 264. Under tab 6, 256, 258, and 270. Under tab 7, 241, and under tab 8, 272. There are a few left on the consent calendar. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the rest of the consent calendar.
Second moved.
Senator Bradley moves. Senator D'Alessandro seconds to adopt the rest of the consent calendar. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The rest of the consent calendar is adopted. First item will come to, for questions, is item number 24251. And that is the Department of Education. Welcome, Commissioner.
Good morning, and for the record, Frank Gadelblue, Commissioner of Education.
Tammy Valancourt, CFO for the department.
Okay. 251. It was curious why, even though you're already occupying the building and you're in the building, so much more money has to be spent now for modifications. So that was a curious thing we all wondered about.
Yeah, so great question, and I appreciate that question. And what's not completely clear from the fiscal item, and I apologize for that, is the original purchase negotiated price based upon an appraisal was $7 million for this facility. In a typical real estate transaction, is an inspection done, and there is a list of items that need to be mitigated. So the actual purchase price for this building was not the $7 million. It was actually $6,250,000, so a $750,000 decrease off of the capital appropriation. And so working with DAS, they had asked us to look at otherwise lapsing general funds from the previous fiscal year to be able to bring forward, to be able to mitigate some of those punch list items as part of the close. The types of items that's going to include are various, repair and maintenance types of things in the building, which would be expected. I still think, I was thinking about this as I was coming today. I still think we have actually got quite a good deal. In terms of the value, $6,250,000, I believe that the estimates of the repair of the facility that we previously were in are $10 to $15 million of continuing investment in that building. So the facility is actually working out quite nicely. Its proximate location to the highway is very convenient to educators. We have over 7,000 outside visitors to the agency every year. It includes an event space and some classrooms, so we're able to conduct continuing education for educators. Just yesterday, we had a training session going on in several of our classrooms for discovery education and bringing educators in. So we're happy with the facility.
Very good. And this is how far from your present position, over in the office park?
How far?
Yeah.
It's just a couple of miles, but it is actually tends to be a little bit more convenient in the sense that it's right on Main Street and right off of the highway. So again, all these external visitors that stop by, it's very easy for them to find us right off of the highway and convenient for them to get in and out.
I guess I'm not familiar with Hall Street, so.
It's the Granite State College building, the old Granite State College building right off of 93.
Okay. Yep, now I know where it is. Thank you. Further questions from committee members? Representative Leishman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for taking my questions. So you say that there won't be really any impact on existing programs by taking more than $500,000 from that line. Could you explain that? That it's a lot of money and that the removal won't impact.
So these are funds that we would have been lapsing from last year that are then carrying forward. So essentially, rather than using the capital savings, because we procured it for less, I think DAS wanted to just basically use these lapsed funds to be able to do those repairs on the building.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the item.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Senator Gray, second by Senator Bradley to approve the item. Further discussions? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Sounds like you got a good deal. All right, moving on to 252, and that's Health and Human Services. And Representative Edwards had a comment, or was it Representative, was it Leishman?
It was
that-
me.
Was you? Representative Erf is recognized.
Do you want to let them introduce themselves first? Do you want to let them introduce themselves first?
Yes. Welcome, Mr. White.
Good morning. I'm Katya Fox. I'm the Director of the Division for Behavioral Health at HHS.
Good morning, Nathan White, Chief Financial Officer with the Department of Health and Human Services.
Good morning, and thank you both for being here. I don't have a question, but I want to explain why I'm going to oppose this. First of all, I really appreciate Mr. White's explanation. It was excellent. The concern I have, though, is we're adding 5 new general funded positions, general funds funded positions. And I think we've made clear over the last couple budget cycles that we're not looking to grow headcount in the department. I think this is becoming more relevant in light of the fact that next cycle, we can expect a tighter budget cycle for a variety of reasons, one of which, of course, is we increased Medicaid rates, and those are really going to hit next budget cycle. The other is all the COVID and ARPA funds are expiring, and I don't know, because it doesn't get reported to us how many of those are actually used for ongoing expenses, which will probably want to be continued. So for those reasons, I feel that even with Mr. White's explanation, if it was such a high priority goal to have these 5 new positions, that would make sense to just reallocate your current personnel to fill those positions. Thank you.
Response?
Thank you for the question, comment, Representative Erf. During the last budget cycle in House Bill 2, we had one of the questions that was posed that I just kind of want to address for the committee offline prior to the meeting was, what services are you stopping? And no services were being stopped here. The funds that are being used here were appropriated to us via HB 2. They were funds that were repurposed from a prior biennium, and there was a broad authority relative to the use of those funds, and needs have been identified to support the current and ongoing initiatives where we have not had adequate staff capacity. And Katja, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Sure. As you have very much been involved in the infusion of dollars as we look at new programming and expanded programming to address the needs of people in New Hampshire for mental health and substance use services. And with that funding comes additional responsibility on the department. And to be good stewards of those dollars, we need to make sure that they're being spent efficiently and effectively. And we have seen this amazing growth as the needs have required, but we have not grown the people and the staff to be able to continue that oversight. And so that's the request that's before you today.
Further discussion on the item? Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thanks very much for coming. Always good to see you, Katya. Good to see you. As referencing Representative Herb's questions, where are we as we begin to prepare for the next biennium with regard to this situation? This is going to be an ongoing situation. We have services that we have to render, and where are we as we're planning for the future?
Sure. Our department, as well as every other agency in the state, we were given our budget targets on August 1st. We are currently in the process of going through and looking at every class line, looking at every need, and trying to prioritize those things that need to be absolutely 100% need to be within our efficiency budget, as well as those items that would be included as prioritized needs. So we're very much in the throes of that right now. Our agency budget will be completed mid-September and submitted to the Department of Administrative Services and published on the 1st of October.
Thank you. But
Follow-up?
if I could, thank you. But indeed, given the memo with regard to the budget, you're going to establish priorities, obviously, as you move forward. But with programs like this that you're driving forward, they've got to be sustained or maintained. And I think that, for my vision, I'm not going to be here for the preparation of the budget. I'm sorry, you're going to miss me.
We will.
But I think a lot of consideration has to be given by this group, I think, as to what's going to happen moving forward, because we're making these commitments here, based on existing funds. So I think we're okay for 25. I think we're going to survive 25, okay. But I'm very concerned about the future. Very concerned. So I think you have your hands full in meeting the obligations that you're committed to here, and also going forward. Thank you. I appreciate your response to that.
Representative Edwards,
What do you want me to do?
is there a response to that?
As I said before, at this point in time, we're looking at all of our programming and all of our costs and looking at things globally and at a micro level. And we haven't made any decisions yet, but those will be reflected in the coming weeks in our budget. And I agree with your commentary. Yes, it will be challenging. It is very challenging.
Representative Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking the question. This is more a strategic overview question. We have tried in the last two budget cycles to be very aggressive at funding IT investments for infrastructure, and one of our thoughts driving that has been to give the department the productivity tools it needs to have in order to continue to redeploy manpower to the highest value tasks. And I've heard you, I've read your email, and it's a great email, like Representative Earth said, and I've heard your answer. I'm just wondering, to what extent do you, and we can take most of this answer offline, but I'm just curious, are we starting to see the impact of the money that we've spent the last two budget cycles on IT in terms of productivity improvements? And are they discernible? Are they describable?
Sure. So I think Dave Wieters, our Chief Operating Officer, would be most qualified to answer that question. But in this past budget, there were two appropriations in HB2 specifically for IT consultants, one to help us with the design and two to help us with implementation. And there has been ongoing work across the department to implement Salesforce-based solutions as well as some other e-signature and expedited processing. But yes, we have seen improvements in that, but I think what's important to recognize is that that's not necessarily going to eliminate the need for positions. I think with every legislative cycle, both at the state and federal level, we continue to have additional reporting requirements, additional programming requirements put on the department that continues to take away the resources that we have. So while I do think that efficiencies are incredibly important to gain through those, I just want to also recognize the fact that the baseline operating needs continue to increase as well.
Follow up.
Absolutely agree. Government's growing. We're asking more and more of you. I absolutely agree with your point. I'd like to just keep this other point distinct, though.
Sure.
Are we seeing payback in terms of increased productivity as a result of the IT infrastructure investments?
Sure. Would it be acceptable if I had Dave
Absolutely.
Wieters follow up with some specific details on the various programs that have been implemented? Would that be helpful?
Right. And
Sure.
if you just, because we're in a budget cycle, it's going to be a big question next year particularly. So we don't need an immediate answer, but it's coming.
Excellent.
Further
To approve.
excuse me. On item 24-252, Senator Gray moves to approve, Senator Bradley seconds. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
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 Two noes. The rest are ayes, so you wish to be recorded as noes? All right. Moving on to tab 6.
Oh, still in 3.
Oh, still on, no, we still have 264. Department of Administrative Services. Talking mathematics here. I read the item, it says approval of $1,838,351. When I look at the item, I don't see that figure repeated. And we were trying to figure out how that figure came to be and took some rather imaginative moving figures around to come up with it. Is that in fact the figure, or is it the 1,765,091?
That is a great question. For the record, Sherry Rockburn, Assistant Commissioner, Department of Administrative Services. I'll have to take a look at the difference. I didn't notice a math error when we were reviewing it, so I'll have to take a look to see what that variance is. Normally, it's the combination of both accounting units. So there's a combination of 444 and the 72,000 that's getting moved within the accounts. So I can get you a detailed sheet of sort of exactly how that comes up. I think what's throwing it is that we have both the ins and outs of 1.3 million that's coming out of one accounting unit, and there's significant numbers of coming into the accounting unit. So I'll have to look at the math for you to break that out. I know
All
that we
right,
did
well-
look at that, but I'll take a look at it.
Give us a wave when you get your figures done.
Yep, sure. Just give me a few minutes and I'll
Bring
take a
that
look at
item
that.
back.
Sure.
We'll skip by it for now. And we'll go on to tab 6. And item 256. And I believe it was Representative Edwards had questions on these, or incentive payments, and
Yes, sir. Do we want David?
they, yeah, new folks, introduce yourselves.
Good morning. I'm David Chorney, the Deputy Medicaid Director. I'm here for Henry Littman.
And Nathan
Welcome
White,
back, Mr. White.
CFO.
So this question is, I'm fine with the proposal. I just have some questions. As I understand the process, and I need you to correct me if I'm mistaken. is that we withhold 2% of the premium payments to Medicaid and the MCOs so that we can create some incentive goals, some stretch goals for them to achieve that further state policies and priorities. And to the extent that they hit those, they get paid those on a timely basis. But any money that's not spent out to pay for an incentive payment gets withheld and stored until sometime after the accounting period of the contract closes. And all of that money that's withheld still needs to go back to the MCOs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so with that in place, my questions are, do the MCOs know how to book any anticipated revenue that may come back to them through the payment of the unpaid out incentive programs? In other words, do they have an accounting concern if they don't have enough data to adequately book an accounts receivable? Do you know?
I don't know, but they do know the total capitation amount and the total amount of funds available and what's been earned up to a period of time and what's left over. And they would be able to account, I think, on their books. And
I think the challenge that they have, and I'm not in the weeds, and you are, but I think the problem that they have is that they know the pool, but they know that there are 3 MCOs, and they don't know the methodology in which you will carve up the remaining unspent balance. And as a result of not knowing the methodology you will use to make a proportionate payout, they are hesitant to book an accounts receivable. Does that? And I maybe you could just take that away and think about it and talk to the MCOs about it. And then, may I follow up?
Follow up?
Now, I'm a big believer in stretch goals, but there seems to be 2 things at play when we do stretch goals or incentive goals. Is that there needs to be some hope that the stretch goals are achievable. We don't want to create a stretch goal that we know or should know is really not achievable, and sort of mess with them without any chance of success. That's one thing. The other thing is some of these stretch goals would need to be in place for 1, 2, 3 years to let these kind of battleship MCOs move towards where we're directing. So in your opinion, do you think we are coming up with adequately stretched goals, not overstretched? And do you think we're leaving them in place long enough to become achievable?
I do. So we do look at the likelihood that the MCO could potentially reach the goal without making it too easy, but also without making it too hard. And for certain goals, we want to see, a continuing trend over, because it's a 5-year contract over a period of time. So when you look at the current contract that we're about to go live with on September 1st, one of the goals is the new primary care focus model and health risk assessment completion. And so that would sort of be a ramp up of, like, in year 1, we would like to see this, and that we would likely keep that metric in future years, seeing continued growth. Similar with lead screening. But then there are also more short-term goals that we want to incentivize the MCOs with. For example, in the unwind, we wanted the MCOs to help with outreach and redetermination. So that was more of a focused, shorter-term goal, because the unwind had an a definitive start and end date, or was somewhat definitive.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the answer. And then I'd like to move to pass this if there's no other discussion.
All right, motion to approve, is there a second? Second by Senator Susi. Further discussion? Seeing none. Motion was to approve 24256. Is there any, are you ready for the question? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. That item is adopted. Please stay seated. We'll be right with you in a minute. I'm just going to announce that 257 has been removed, and we're moving on to 258. And this was another one that speaks about dish payments. You may want to bring another.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Senator Gray.
Since we didn't talk about 257 before we took the vote to pass all the other items on the consent calendar, it may be wise to have a motion for reconsideration on that motion and then pull it and then have the vote again. But I'm looking towards legislative.
Sure. So 257 was withdrawn by the department. The letter itself is the necessary action to remove that. So no additional, once that letter is submitted, the item is no longer under consideration. So no additional motions are necessary.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now we come to 24258, dealing with dish payments. And I believe somebody had a question about the state plan amendment. Representative Edwards.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I'm sure you recall that at the end of this legislative session, there was a lot of discussion in the legislature about whether or not the dish payments should be paid out to the hospitals at a 91% or maybe a 93% or somewhere in between. And the legislature failed to agree to anything in the committee of conference, and therefore the governor has stated publicly that he's going to distribute 80% with the idea of keeping the other 20% for other community services. And so that was the last I had heard about this, was back in early July. I'm just wondering if there's any update that you could give us relative to what we're doing with the disproportionate share distributions.
Good morning, David Chorney again, Deputy Medicaid Director. We are following through with the 80% plan. We don't really have an update on the 80% plan right now, but with respect to New Hampshire Hospital and dish payments under the prior Met settlement agreement and the prior state statute, New Hampshire Hospital is not included in the Met dish settlement. So for purposes of the 91% or 80% calculating it, any of the funds New Hampshire Hospital pays is outside of that. And that's because under federal law, there's a separate allotment for IMDs, which is New Hampshire Hospital. And so there's different rules around that.
Anything further?
I don't have any further questions.
Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification. The dish deal the deal that we had is in place. They've already paid the fee. They should have been reimbursed for this year. It's the new deal that begins. Isn't that correct? So the 80%, we asked for a change in the plan and so forth, but that's for the future, right?
Correct.
All right, I want it to be clear that the hospitals got 91% back because that arrangement was in place and it was in existence, and a change is for the next biennium. So that has to be dealt with by the legislature because the current deal expired. Right, and so they got the 91% back at this point in time. It's for the future that this 80% situation will be discussed by the legislature. The governor has one idea, but I think the legislature has an option to work on that and to make its own decision with regard to that. I find that this situation, this 80% nonsense, having been done, well, fiat, that's in my opinion not the way to do business. This legislature should have a say in that. We all have hospitals in our districts. We're all being serviced by those hospitals. Those hospitals are performing, and we had an arrangement that was in place for a period of years that we thought was fairly successful. I think the hospitals did too. So this change that's going to take place is going to have to be dealt with by the legislature. Am I correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I love those quick answers. I love yes. I hate no. Thank you.
So if I may, Senator, I want to give you some more yes. I agree with everything you just said. I wanted to understand what the status was several months later because we're running out of time in the House to submit legislation. And I just want to let the senators know that if there's a bill to be worked on in this area, I'm open to doing that, but my clock is ticking.
Right. Appreciate that. Thank you for that code. But I think, I mean, I'm not going to be here, but I think the Senate will have something to say. I would hope so. Thank you.
Is there a motion on the item 258, 24-258, moved by Senator Bradley, second by Senator D'Alessandro? Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, you ready for the question? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That item is adopted. Before we go to Sherry Rockburn again, we'll finish up this 24-270. Refugees. And the question arose, you obviously list 210 Afghans and 923 Ukrainians. How many others from other countries are we taking care of other than those that are listed? Do we know what other groups that we might have?
Good morning, Ann Landry, Associate Commissioner. Thank you for the question. So, yes, we have estimates of what is anticipated, what the state has approved for the upcoming year. Sorry, my phone just went. And so, sorry, where did that just go? The best estimate for the upcoming year is 315 refugees that are coming from countries outside of Ukraine and Afghanistan or Cuba or Haiti. Those are special kind of refugee categories. So the standard refugee resettlement program that we're anticipating for the upcoming federal fiscal year is 315.
And these are all covered with federal funds?
Yes, this is a fully federally funded program across the country, and the federal government works with each state in allocating the number of refugees. We have very little say into that.
Thank you. Yep. Representative Irv.
Do you happen to know how many of these programs that are letting these, quote, refugees in are the result of executive orders as opposed to current law?
In executive order, you're referring to like the Ukrainians and Afghanistan, those emergency humanitarian or?
No, specifically with the 315 others that you're referring to, the others.
No, I don't know which ones are related to executive order. They anticipate a number of refugees from certain countries each year, right, that are dealing with civil wars or religious persecution or what have you. And I'm not sure which ones are related to executive order or not.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Representative Edwards.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Landry, for taking the question. I think just to sort of restate where I believe state policy is on this and to hope that you all are executing it when no one's around is that we understand the refugee program. We understand the federal money that's coming to it. And so there are questions around whether or not the federal funds are adequate. If they cease to become adequate, we should be getting a heads up that the money isn't keeping up with the federal obligation. That's one thing. And then the second thing is there are other categories other than refugees. I don't think asylum seekers count as refugees, and certainly the gotaways don't count as either asylum seekers or refugees. Are we making explicit endeavors to ensure that gotaways are not receiving state benefits other than those mandated to provide emergency medical care in ERs? what's the status of our making sure the integrity of the eligibility, I guess?
Yes, thank you. So I can't speak to how emergency rooms across the state serve any population, right? That's up. I mean, they serve whomever comes into their emergency room, but that is completely separate from our refugee resettlement program, in which we have federal refugee resettlement agencies that are part of the I think it's 8 or 9 federal resettlement agencies that have local branches. And the only individuals who are served by the federal funds that come through this program are those legal refugees that the federal government says they're ready for New Hampshire. It does. There are, you're right, humanitarian parolees. That's what the Ukrainian status is. There are asylees. There are special immigrant visas. They're all part of the federal refugee resettlement program. And some of those categories receive like these cash and medical, and some do not. It just depends on the status. But the only individuals for which this program serves are the legal refugees that come through this program. So it's very much vetted. There's lots of federal reporting. There's no discrepancy of what these dollars are for. They only serve those refugees that come through the program.
And did you say that the federal funding so far has been adequate to the task?
Oh, I apologize to your first question. Yes, as far as we know, that in fact we've had they've increased the amount of funding in the last couple of years due to the Afghan population that has arrived, as well as Ukrainians that continue to arrive. So there has been more than adequate funding to serve this population.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If there aren't any other questions, I'd move to approve.
Second.
Motion by Representative Edwards, second by Senator Susie to approve item 24270. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That is adopted. I'd like to now return back to tab 3 and call on Sherry Rockburn.
Thank you. I apologize for not having the math in my head a little bit sooner. So there's 3 numbers that make this up. The first, if you look at the very first page, the transfers out of 444,000 plus the 72,000. Those 2 numbers total 517,444. In addition to that, there's another transfer out of 1,320,907. It's on page 2, and it's class line 022. So on page 2, the 1.3 million plus the 517,000, those numbers make up 1,838,351 that's in the total. So I'll give you a minute to take a look at that. But the total that's always written in the letter is the sum of the transfers out, even though there's ins and outs that sort of would offset it. We just focus on all the negative numbers, which are the transfers out, and those will sum that 1,838,351, which is correctly stated in the requested action.
Thank you. All right, so the figure is correct, but it's just not spelled out in a way that's easily recognized.
And we can make that change on future ones, so it's a little bit more clear.
Appreciate it. Any further discussions on item 24264?
Second.
Senator Gray moves the item. Senator Bradley seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, you ready for the question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is adopted. Thank you for the explanation. Now we'll move on to tab 7. And we had item 241, the only item there, I think. Okay. I had a question. It talked about giving these to communities that were low and moderate communities. Where do I find a list of who's a low and who's a moderate community?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs with the New Hampshire Department of Energy. That is an excellent question. So US EPA, who is granting us these funds defined low moderate income as the household making less than 80% of area median income or less across the state. So that obviously that varies by county. That aligns with housing and urban development's threshold for living in subsidized housing, for example.
So it's by county, and if you're low income, you're only making 80% of the average income in that county.
Correct.
Okay,
And then that is then controlled for by household size as well.
thank you. I was curious about that, and where would I go to look it up where that figure might be? Is it under the EPA, or is it under the census, or?
I'd be happy to provide the committee with the list where it has the breakout of everywhere in the state for those figures.
Appreciate it, thank you, because we're all wondering if, okay, can my communities qualify? Well, are they low, are they moderate, what are they?
If I may follow up, it's not necessarily the community itself, it's the individuals who meet that criteria. So you could have, for example, a very wealthy community where somebody happens to be making 80% or less of area median income in that community, they would qualify. So there's no restriction in terms of where the person lives or where the household lives. Anybody who meets those criteria would be eligible to benefit.
All right, so it's an individual that gets the grant, not a community system.
Well, it would be the individual or the household that qualifies would be able to receive the benefits from the installation of these arrays. The arrays themselves would be installed depending on where they come in the door, so to speak, either by grants provided by the Community Loan Fund, the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, or through a grant through the department itself.
Thank you. Further discussions on the item? All right, questions have been answered. Anybody wish to approve?
So moved.
All right. Senator Bradley moves approval. Senator D'Alessandro seconds for 24-241. Are there any further discussions? Seeing none, all you ready for the question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That item is adopted. Okay, moving on to tab 8. Last one we have a question on is 272. And you will introduce yourself.
Good morning, Miles Greenway, Intern Port Director.
Okay, this one was 271 or 272. Find my place, yes. Representative Leishman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for taking my question. So there has been some notoriety about this activity recently, and I did hear from Representative Grota from Rye, looking for a commitment and transparency and more public participation, which I guess maybe there's been some lacking thereof.
Thanks for the question. So we did address a little bit of that on the 8th at our last PDA board meeting of this month. Also, I'm working hand in hand and letting the planning board know for Rye what's happening, keeping them in contact with everyone. And we're in the process right now of having a couple of more public meetings, not in between now and the next board meeting as well. So they're just trying to be as transparent as possible, as well as with the other project that's in Portsmouth too for the commercial fishing pier.
Okay, I guess that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussions with the previous director were about retail on the Rye Harbor. And thank you for the photos you sent us. It looked like parking would be a problem. And I remember he expressed that to me, that, you know, that you couldn't have retail there and still have parking for the fishermen. And they'll have to fill up the parking lot and take their boats out. And there may not be any space left for retail. So I wonder how we're dealing with that. Is there a project in mind? Are you going to enlarge the whole space? Are you going to make more parking or what? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, sir. So right now the commercial fishermen park over on the commercial pier side. Haven't had any complaints about parking so far. But you are correct. If we move forward with the proposed plans, it would incorporate a little bit of the parking that we use right now for the recreational side and commercial and recreational fishing, and those folks that are attending for the establishments there. So we're still working with the engineers and our staff to work through that with the parking.
Thank you. Further questions on the item?
Move
Seeing-
to approve.
Seeing none. Motion to approve 24-272 by Senator Gray, second by Senator Bradley. Further discussion? Seeing none, you ready for the question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, we're done with the consent calendar. We're moving on to the regular calendar. Under tab 9, I think. Tab 10. All right. First item is Youth Development Center Claims Administration and Settlement Fund. And you can sit on those chairs over there if you've got other people that want to have input, if there's not enough room for them at the table. Yeah, you can sit
Okay,
on,
thank you, Mr. Chair.
sit on the end there, and if you speak, remember to push the button for the microphone. General Fermello, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, John Fermella, Attorney General, and joining me today to my right is Attorney Laura Raymond in the Civil Bureau at the Attorney General's office. She has replaced Jen Ramsey as the AG designee for the YDC claims process, so she's been spearheading our efforts there. We're also joined this morning by Jen Foley. She is General Counsel with the Administrator's Office. Matt Broadhead, Associate Attorney General in our office, head of the Division of Legal Counsel, and Tom Kempfer, who is the Director of Claims at Operations for the YDC claims process in the office. So we know this is an important item, and we wanted to make sure everyone who potentially might need to speak to it is here. I'm going to, if it would be helpful, in a minute, I'll turn it over to Attorney Raymond to give you an overview, but I'll just start by sort of setting the context here. We're here today to get approval to the revisions to the guidelines and the other documents for the YDC claims process. These revisions are really just meant to implement the revisions that we just made in this past legislative session. So as you'll recall, we had extensive negotiations with Claimants Counsel to come up with revisions to the YDC claims process that would result in the vast majority of the claimants coming through the process as opposed to going through litigation. So that bill passed in the last session. After the bill was signed by the governor in June, we've had a lot of discussions with Claimants Counsel since then to come up with the revisions, or these revisions to the guidelines. And you will have received a letter from Nixon Peabody and Riley and Associates that indicates that they are, I would say, supportive of these revisions. I don't have the letter in front of me, but I think what they said is, with these revisions, while there was negotiation and they didn't get everything they wanted, we didn't get everything we wanted, this was a sufficient compromise for them to continue to feel that they could recommend this process to the vast majority of their clients. So that is the product you see before you. I certainly want to thank Nixon Peabody and Riley and Associates and all the attorneys involved there and all the other Claimants Counsel for coming to the table and engaging in these negotiations. I want to thank everyone who's here today with me for the work on this, the work that's been done so far and the work to come. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Attorney Raymond just to give you an overview of the biggest pieces of these revisions, and then I'll certainly be here to answer questions as well. But Laura spearheaded the details of this, so I want to give her a chance to give you that overview.
For discussion purposes, the committee, we're looking at both 261 and 262, which are very closely related. So if you have questions on either one, this is the moment, but go ahead and give us the explanation.
Thank you and good morning. So I would be happy to walk through in the order of our item the sort of overview of what the proposed revisions to these documents are. We've also provided to the committee today a handout, a one-page handout that summarizes those changes to both the guidelines governing the value of claims as well as the process. I believe those were just handed out to hopefully guide this overview as well.
Just back up from the mic about an inch or two.
Sorry about that. Thank you. So first, with respect to the claims process, as Attorney General Formella mentioned, the main driver of the proposed revisions there was the changes to the statute that passed in this most recent legislative session. So the changes there are really focused on updating some timelines to bring the claims process as it previously existed in line with those new amendments. Another significant procedural change outlined on your handout is the fact that the claims administrator now has the discretion under the statute to determine whether to award payments from the fund in a lump sum or in installment payments over time. That is a change from the previous practice where the claimant had the discretion to make that election. So that is also reflected in the changes to the process. That will help, I think, ensure the stability and solvency of the fund over time for many more claimants to come. We also, again, in looking at those timeframes, we're looking to expedite certain parts of the claim process. To that end, the process also now allows for brief oral arguments by counsel at the end of a resolution proceeding. Again, a change to the previous process, one that we've sort of been beta testing, for lack of a better word, in resolution proceedings, and I think is going well so far and will ultimately result in an expedited process of awards being issued out after following a resolution proceeding. And finally, the new statute, as amended, provides that instead of submitting a complete claim by the deadline of June 30th, 2025, claimants can instead submit a notice of claim form that is included with the item for approval today. And when a claimant submits that form, they are essentially putting the fund on notice that they intend to submit a claim, but maybe don't have all of their complete materials right now. And they have 60 days following the submission of that form to submit a completed claim. So that's also a change from the current process. So in lieu of filing a full complete claim by June 30th, 2025, they can also file a notice of claim by that date and still be extended 60 days to file their complete claim. Those are sort of a high-level overview of the changes to the process. I would be happy to answer any questions about that specifically or continue through to the guidelines themselves.
Senator D'Alessandro for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you very much. The stuff you said this was fine, thank you. I did get the letter from the lawyers, and it seems to me that they're in concurrence with the changes that have been made. I would like to know the number of people who have filed claims. This number has been bounced around. I think in the letter they talked about 1,200, somebody said about 15. How many claims have been filed? What is the number of claims that we're dealing with at this time?
Yes, so that number as of August 14th, I believe, is 642. Miss Foley or Tom may have an updated number.
It's 632.
Oh, 632.
And that's, just to clarify, that's claims in the claims process. Were you asking, Senator, about that and also about lawsuits filed, or just
Yes.
claims in the claims process?
The number of individuals who are involved in the legal aspects of this. This is lawsuits and your administrative work.
Yep. I think lawsuits, it's 13 to 1,400 at this point. I don't have that exact number off the top of my head.
So that's a realistic number that's I've heard that a variety of numbers. I'd like to focus on what the real number is. As I think the public should be aware of that. Obviously, when you look at that and when you look at what's happened in terms of the settlements, you got X number of dollars that are out the door. You're expecting you know, an additional appropriation that's going to come. I think we should have at least an idea of how many cases we're dealing with.
I think, Senator, when we get to June 30th, 2025, that will be the point where we get the final number of claims that will come through this process. You know, we can make a projection of what we think it will be, but you know, we won't know the final number until then.
But I think the projection is extremely important because that projection is going to call for appropriation.
Yep.
And somebody around this table is going to have to make that appropriation.
Yes. Well, and that gets to, and this isn't necessarily part of the guidelines and the process today, but that gets to, you know, the payment. Well, the payments over time are part of the process, but then the $75 million cap per fiscal year. So yes, I mean, when we were going through the legislative process, we discussed the fact that the sooner we have the deadline for the window to close, the sooner we will finally be able to say, this is how many claims came into the process. This was the total amount claimed, and we'll, you know, we've resolved about 200 claims now, and the average award has been maintaining around $500,000. So I think once we get the total number of claims in and we know that's it, we'll be able to make a projection sort of over how many years we're going to need to continue funding this, given the cap of $75 million per year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Leishman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a few, but I'll certainly go through the chair. On page 12, there's a mention of a maximum of 3 hours for the discussion of a claim. What happens if it has to go over 3 hours? This is just a suggested guideline, or is this, in fact, that 3 hours, the gavel comes down and that's it?
In my experience with resolution proceedings and having attended them and having gotten the information about each one that has occurred, actually none have come close to 3 hours. That's because it's a very difficult conversation for the claimant, the victim, to have, and it's not the intent, I think, of anyone in this process, either from our office or from the administrator's office, to continue to sort of compound that by dragging it on for the full 3 hours. They often don't go that long. I imagine if it had to, no one would object to a continuation of additional time.
Further question.
Further question.
I think it was on page 22 in my notes here. The payment out over time, I think, is up to 10 years. Is that something you've tried to get already, or are people willing to go that far out? Or?
So I can speak to that. We are starting to implement the considerations for that. The claimants that I have seen information on so far, none have affirmatively expressed a willingness to go for a full 10 years, but many have expressed a willingness to do some sort of payment plan. That being said, the discretion to award that payment plan is vested in the administrator, considering the claimant's financial circumstances and the other items delineated in the statute, such as health and things like that. But it remains vested in the administrator regardless.
And just one.
And I would just add that we're in very early days for the new provision that allows the administrator to award these or make these awards in installments. So I think we'll be better placed to give you feedback on that in the months ahead.
One final question, if I could, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I know we're all sickened by what happened, here over the decades, and I looked at like the guidelines for the payouts for particular types of assault. Where did those guidelines? I know we've talked about this in the past, and I think some suggestion was made. Other states were looked at. Are these new baseline award amounts? Are these new numbers that you've come up with, or are they based on numbers that we've seen in the past?
So I can speak with respect to the new award values that were assigned in the guidelines themselves, which is the next document up on the discussion. So for those dollar amounts, we did do some research into things like what claims for similar type of conduct have settled for in other states within this state, and tried to develop a baseline award amount that seemed appropriate in light of the conduct being alleged versus the conduct in the remainder of the guidelines, the dollar values for which had already been approved by the committee. So it was sort of trying to, place it in that matrix which already existed, considering a wide range of factors, including, how often it occurred, the severity, all of those factors were considerations. And in fact, those dollar figures were part of what was open to negotiation with claimants counsel. And we did have many conversations, both with the Nixon Peabody law firm about those values and what would be appropriate, as well as counsel for other claimants too. So that was achieved with a broad measure of consensus, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other members? Senator Susi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one, if I may. I just wanted to clarify, the 632 number is all-inclusive, so some of those may be withdrawn or deemed not worthy of following through the process. So 632 is everything presented.
That's true, and some have been resolved by now as well.
Great, thank you.
Without any additional questions on the process, I would be happy to turn more fully to the guidelines. We've just begun discussing them, but again, just to give you an overview of the major proposed changes to those documents. The first was to address the new categories of abuse added by the legislature in the most recent amendments. Specifically, those were unlawful restraint, both isolated confinement and placement in physical, mechanical, or pharmaceutical restraints. Both of those are defined as unlawful restraint under the new statute. Also, unlawful strip search, intentional infliction of emotional distress, reckless conduct, criminal threatening, and invasion of privacy. So we slotted all of those new categories of compensable abuse into the existing framework of the guidelines per the mandate in the new statute. There's also a mandate in that amended statute to provide compensation for egregious sexual abuse. So we included that definition in the guidelines as well and explained the standard for compensation there. Finally, the other major change was just to update the aggravating factors that are found near the end of the guidelines that can increase an award if certain things take place. The statute added a couple new categories of aggravating factors, mainly a greater impact of the abuse on the claimant as compared to others similarly situated, subjection to multiple forms of sexual and other abuse simultaneously, and participation by more than one actor physically in an act of sexual or other abuse. So those were the main changes to those guidelines there. Again, would be happy to take any additional questions from the committee members about those.
I think you really opened the door, or at least the legislature did, by adding this other and including solitary confinement. This opens the door for the secure housing unit in the prison, where all of the people there are in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. If we think that's compensable through a lawsuit, we're really in trouble. All those people could go and get these same lawyers and come back and sue us saying, oh, I was really tortured by the 4 years I spent in solitary confinement. This really opens the door. And another thing that disturbs me, and it supposedly is left to the Attorney General, is why we don't more widely use lie detectors. My friends in law enforcement really put a lot of faith in them. And you might eliminate a whole bunch of these people if they couldn't pass a lie detector test, and that would be a lot quicker than the 3 hours that you're might spend on all these questions and all the people involved. It seems like it ought to be an automatic review that everybody goes through this. And supposedly it's left to your authority to do this, and I wondered why you haven't asked for it.
So I'll respond to both of those points, Mr. Chair. The first, just to sort of opening the door to solitary confinement or intentional infliction of emotional distress in other incarceration settings like the prison. I just point out a couple things. One, this is what we're talking about here. The cases we're talking about here are unique because when these things occurred, these individuals were kids. So yes, they were in a juvenile detention facility, but they were kids for whom, the state was not, the intention was not just to lock them up, but also to rehabilitate them, to get them services, get them treatment. So I would point out that first. Second, the compensable solitary confinement for purposes of this process, it's only compensable if there wasn't some legitimate basis or reason, it's only compensable if it was excessive. So it's not to say that any time someone might have been placed in solitary confinement, that would be compensable. It's if there wasn't. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, so I want to be a little careful. But basically, it has to be that there wasn't a legitimate basis or some other good reason for the solitary confinement. To your point on the lie detector test, I mean, it really. That is just part of the overall consideration of this process in balancing the need to, have some level of verification and investigation of these claims with the need to recognize that we're talking about individuals who were victims of physical and sexual abuse when they were children. We certainly would never, if someone came to law enforcement and said that they had been abused as a child, I mean, not even as an adult, but as a child, we certainly would not put them through a lie detector test. It's just not how we treat victims of sexual abuse, especially. But we absolutely would not do that if we're talking about child victims. And we have other ways, especially in the law enforcement context, to look to verify whether someone's telling the truth. There's other interview techniques. There's been a lot of study and work put into those techniques over many years and decades in the law enforcement community, but we wouldn't use lie detector tests in that context. And I think, in this context where we're trying to balance the need to do some verification investigation with the need to respect the fact that these are victims of physical and sexual abuse and victims who suffered this abuse as kids, a lie detector test just isn't something that I think would be appropriate, especially for a process like this. It really wouldn't be appropriate in almost any context, but this is meant to be a process where it's not litigation. So we're not doing the sort of in-depth type of discovery and investigation that would happen in litigation over a period of a couple years before you got to trial. It's a more streamlined, simpler process. And the trade-off is that while we may not do as much in-depth investigation and verification, there's a cap on the damages you can get. And, I think the first YDC trial showed, and putting aside, I won't get into the details, putting aside all of the issues we're litigating there post-trial about what the damages cap should be and how the law works on that. I mean, I think you saw where a damages number can be in a case like that. And I think that demonstrates the trade-off we're making in this process.
When you go to trial, I wish you'd emphasize to the jury where this money is coming from with some of these ridiculous claims. It's not coming from the actors who probably are still collecting pensions. Very few of them, I think one has been up for trial so far, and I think you've got 11 people identified. They all should have been in trial by now and been charged with these abuses and should perhaps confront some of these people that they abused as youth. And you should also make the point that a person who worked hard all their life and kept their nose clean and prepared themselves for a good career, at the end of a career might have $2 million that they earned in their lifetime. You're giving $2 million to people who didn't obey the rules, probably didn't have a good career, and yet they're being rewarded to some extent for suffering, which many people have suffered without being able to get compensated in family situations and so on. It just seems way out of line with what these juries are rewarding, and I'm wondering if you're bringing any semblance of truth to them, that this money is coming out of you folks, because it's coming out of the taxes that the government collects. It's not coming out of the actors, and we're giving these huge awards. What do they prove? The lawyers get rich and the person wastes the money. And I think that point should be made a little more. Thank you.
I can just assure you, Mr. Chair, that for the cases that do go to trial, you know, we certainly are doing everything we can to defend them. And I feel pretty confident in saying that I don't think we've gotten, to the extent the office has gotten criticism for the cases that we're litigating, it has not been that we haven't been pushing hard enough to defend them. So we if the cases go to trial, we are thinking long and hard about what the best way is to defend them and the most effective way is to defend them, and what the best arguments and presentations we can make to a jury are. So I can assure you of that.
Thank you. Further from the committee.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Gray.
I'm kind of uncomfortable in some of the things that we've said here, okay? We've passed legislation, and right now is that legislation been truthfully and, fulfilled in the documents that are for us, okay? So again, we may want to do some other changes in legislation, but right now is not the time to do that. Right now, we should be looking at the document. Does it fulfill the requirements that we put in the legislation, and then move forward?
Further questions from the committee members? Senator Bradley?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to move both items and then speak to them if I can.
Motion and a second. Further discussion. Representative Bradley. Senator
Thank you.
Bradley.
So I think kudos to John, all of the attorneys that are here, to the governor, to our friend Karen Umberger, who sponsored House Bill 1677. This is a very difficult, sad, and awful chapter in New Hampshire history. The trial, the Meehan trial, showed how bad the abuse was. A jury, found a settlement of a huge amount of money. The problems existed. Both pieces of legislation, 591 and 1677, worked assiduously to protect victims, because there are real victims here, victims of abuse in the state care. And as the Attorney General's office and Attorney Broderick and his capable staff have worked through the 200 cases that have been settled, we've actually learned quite a bit. And the legislation that I believe we all voted for, certainly in the Senate we did, and I believe in the House it was passed on a voice vote, also has a responsibility to protect the long-term financial viability of the state. So the point that Representative Leishman earlier made about structured settlements, I think it's important to remember that there's a 5% interest payment for any structured settlement is left in the authority of Administrator Broderick. And I think the whole process has tried to balance those issues, protecting the victims in a victim-centric approach, but at the same time, the long-term viability for the state. This is likely to be a 7 to 10 year process. At $75 million a budget year in every fiscal year, I think this is a long-term issue that we're trying to make the best out of a very bad situation for doing what's right for victims, but also protecting the state. And I think all of you deserve a lot of credit for that. You know, the letter that, John, you didn't have in front of you that I have from, you know, Russ Riley and Dave Vincanonzo does talk about, you know, the collaboration, the consensus, and not everybody got everything they wanted. It was the same thing in Senate Bill 591, but people came together because it has to be done, I guess, is the best way of saying it. And so I think it's important that those of us that are, you know, that voted for the legislation recognize this. I went through, you know, the 50 or so pages of, you know, the new guidelines. It really means a lot to know that the administrator, the Attorney General's office, and, you know, the lead counsels have all come together on it in the same way that 591 did. So that's why I think we should move forward, approve these guidelines, get back to, you know, dealing with the at least 432 other cases that are in front of you, and probably, hopefully, the vast majority of the other ones, and do your job. And we should trust the process. And this is why I know there's been questions about, you know, the extent of the cost of administering this. And the point that you, Mr. Chairman, raise is a very appropriate one of verification. And that's why it's important, in my opinion, that Attorney Broderick have the necessary staff to do what needs to be done to, A, protect the victims, but also vet the testimony. And I think so far, so good. It is a very difficult situation, one that obviously none of us wish would have ever happened, totally needs to be prevented in the future, and try to put this very sad chapter of New Hampshire history behind us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion from committee members. We have a motion and a second to adopt the items 261 and 262. If there's being no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Those items are adopted, and we're moving on to,
Thank you.
thank you. Item 11, Renewable Energy Fund, Department of Energy. It's tab 11, item 24242. Are there any questions on this item? Motion by Representative Leishman to approve, second by Senator D'Alessandro. Further discussion, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The item is adopted. Okay. Do we have anything else on the agenda that needs a vote, Mr. King?
Yes, you have two late items.
Yes,
That
thank
need
you.
action, and then one informational item. The first late item being 24-273, request Department of Health and Human Services to accept $6 million in ARPA funds.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion by Senator Gray, second by Senator Bradley to approve the item 273. A question from Representative Edwards. Is there someone here that can answer it? Representative Edwards.
I may have spoke too quickly. I'm interested in the new late item that has the $6 million of ARPA money. Is this it?
This is it.
Okay. So, so high. So my question on this is that we had established, I think by we, I mean the governor and the royal we from there, the principle that we should take one-time money and spend it on one-time investments. And my simple reading of this is that we're taking this money and augmenting sort of an operational capability. And if that's wrong, I just need to be told I'm wrong. And two, if I'm not wrong, I'd like to know if we're setting ourselves up for failure because this money won't be available, isn't presumed to be available in the future budget cycles. Are we inflating the budgets of our federally qualified health facilities, and we're not going to be able to sustain it? So it's kind of a conversational question.
Good morning, Tricia Tilley. I'm the Associate Commissioner at the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you so much for that question, Representative Edwards. So you're right, that has been the policy moving forward, is one-time money for one-time events. It has also been the practice to use some of these ARPA dollars to fill the holes for operational losses experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the federally qualified health centers have demonstrated that they have had some operational impacts, and these funds will help fill those losses. To your forward-thinking question around like, okay, so we fill a bucket, what happens next, is a part of these funds will be used by the federally qualified health centers to determine a sustainability plan for financing moving forward. They had some hits in the way that the entire healthcare system had impacts during the pandemic, but in particular because the FQHCs are open to all, they have their charge is to serve the uninsured, the underinsured, all comers who walk in the door. They had a disproportional impact. They are also having some other structural issues from some federal constraints around things like 340B funding and some other pieces. And of course, they've been impacted by staffing in the way that every organization, especially every healthcare organization, has been impacted. So these funds will be awarded to them on a need basis, looking at their losses in a very similar way that we did with the community mental health centers, which again is another one of our safety net services. So we want to be able to have them keep their doors open. That's good business for all of us here. We have to have the FQHCs sustained within the state, or else it would have a catastrophic effect on our entire healthcare system. So we want to keep the doors open. We also want them looking forward to figuring out what's the best path moving from this day forward in terms of their sustainability plans and their finance plans.
Follow up.
All right. I remain concerned that we're spending long-term money on operational items. The pandemic's been over for a while, and I don't know how much longer we can justify trying to repair that. But you're working it. My other question is this $6 million the result of a top-down? This is the money we have. Let's put it out there. Or is it the result of a bottoms-up needs assessment to determine what the requirement is for the $6 million, which it looks more like top-down, let's spend what is available.
Thank you. I'll take that question as well. So we didn't propose this. Again, this request came directly from the federally qualified health centers to Gopher. They put forward a proposal, they put forward their budgets, they put forward their financial needs, and this was determined the amount of money that was needed. So I am sure that there was other, and Commissioner Caswell can talk more about that process, but the federally qualified health centers put a proposal forward saying, these are our needs, and this is our plan to address those needs.
Okay, so one last one. So I guess it's a Mr. Caswell question. It just seems to me that you all are allocating the $6 million, and it strikes me that we have all of these open construction projects that are probably doing cost overruns, and I'm just wondering if how confident you are that this is the best way to allocate $6 million.
I am confident that by investing in our federally qualified health centers, we will save money in the long term from uncompensated care in other areas of our healthcare system.
Yes, if there's no questions for these people, we'll ask Mr. Caswell to come forward and comment on this. Director Caswell.
Good morning, Taylor Caswell, Representative Edwards. I can jump right into your question.
So this is a request that's been pending at Gopher for several months. We haven't had the ability to put the money that they had initially requested, which I believe is closer to $8 million was the total request from the health centers. Our staff working with HHS did do an assessment of the need of this program, and I think Commissioner Tilly spoke very well to the outcomes of that in terms of when we determine the need for these operational investments, which you are correct, we have avoided at great effort. But in this instance, it is definitely related to COVID impacts for the health centers themselves. And I think that my understanding is that there are other accommodations on the federal side that should be coming in the future that will help offset these long-term impacts. So these are one-time operational impacts that we felt were necessary to make an investment in at this time.
So thank you for that. It looks like Senator Bradley may have a question, but if there's no other commentary, I'd move the item.
Oh,
Yeah, we already have a motion and a second. All right, if there's no further discussion, the question is to adopt item 24-273.
It's already been moved and seconded.
We have a motion and a second, so is there any further discussion? Seeing none, you ready for the question? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Item 24-273 is adopted. We're moving on to item 24-274, Department of Corrections. Senator Leishman moves the item. Is there a second? Second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, you ready for the question? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That item is adopted. Next late item was 275. Again, we're back to Mr. Caswell. Emergency Relief and Governor's Office of Emergency Relief and Recovery. This is telling where the money's going and it reallocations. It's quite extensive and it's an informational item, so we do not need to have any vote. Are there any questions on the item? No questions, and there's no need to vote on that. So we're moving along to the last page. And we've already planned for the next meeting of September 13th at 10 a.m. Is there any problem with that? Senator Birdsell.
On the informational materials,
Yes, any
can I still
questions
have
on
a
those?
question from the Commissioner Caswell
Okay,
on items 243 and 244? And
Okay.
that's on tourism.
Sorry, thought we were still doing Gopher. Sorry.
No. I just have a question. Now, I know that we've kind of been through this before. We have the Irish New Hampshire Trade Council. And in the legislation that you were authorized to try and do some fundraising to support that. Have you been able to do that?
Not to date, ma'am. No, we don't have the resources available for anything related to that council at this point.
So anyone who's assigned and going to the caucus will not get monetary support.
I'm not sure I know what you're referring
There's
to.
a legislative caucus next week, and there are members that are planning on attending. Is there any funds available to reimburse them for their travels?
Not in my budget, ma'am. No.
Thank you.
okay. Representative Wallner had a question on, was it item FIS 24-260?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe Mr. White could help me with this. So this was the item that was withdrawn. And I just wondered if we will see this item come before us again, and if it does, will it have the same purpose as the item that was withdrawn?
Sure. So we're currently reviewing that item just to review some potential technical changes. There are no impacts to services. I just want to make that very clear, and we'll determine in the future if we'll need to bring that back. But there are no impacts to services. I just want to make that abundantly clear as possible.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any further questions from the committee on informational items? Seeing none, are we ready to discuss the next meeting, as I brought up, September 13th at 10 a.m.? Any problems with that? Okay, that will be our plan, to meet on September 13th at 10 o'clock. Anything else, Mr. Kane?
No.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn in a second. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your attendance and for listening to all these removals. All right.